Good afternoon and welcome to our event on how to win in tough times. We are privileged to have you here and we welcome you with open arms. Can't believe that there are over 100 people in the room, but we are thankful for that and we trust that you will enjoy today. My name is Clive Price. I'm a director of MastWin, and you might be saying to yourself, well, who is MastWin? So let me briefly explain. We are an old new company. When I say old, we're old in that the core group that forms Win-Win right now came from a company that Humphrey Walters started in the late 70s, a company called MastSA. And he recruited us, hand-selected us, and then brought us into MastSA and passed on his mentorship skills, his training skills, and all of his incredibly innovative ways of doing things to us all. We really were a pedigree training company at that point. Quite Rolls-Royce, in fact, is what a few of our clients called us. And in 1985, we listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and we proceeded to have a few more good years before we sold out to a large corporate. The partners at that point went their own ways, and funnily enough, they started their own training companies and specialized in their various fields. And those they still pretty much run up until today, so that's a good 25 years or so. And it was only when COVID struck us in March last year with such devastating repercussions, I don't need to tell you about that, that we got together formally as a group and we said, what happens if we pool our resources and our people into one reservoir? What kind of solutions could we develop to help companies that are in trouble? We brought in some young blood as well, because now we are a bunch of seasoned veterans, and we invited respected and well-known people that we'd worked with to form MastWin. There are 10 of us, and I'll show you a quick screenshot of MastWin and who the company comprises of. So there's a slide shot of us all, 10 people, quite small, but certainly with enough capacity to resource large projects. You'll get to know us, I hope. Okay, now that brings us on to where are we today? Well, as a result of brainstorming for 4 months or 5 months, we came up with a couple of ideas that we feel could help companies or enable them to survive, if not thrive, in this terrible climate that we are addressing right now. The first person we invited in to our brainstorm group, obviously, was Humphrey Walters, the chairman of MastSA in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And we invited Humph in and we together brainstormed and thought about different ways of doing things and what kind of tactics, techniques, and practical tools could we bring into the market right now that would help companies succeed. Our sole purpose is really, how can we enable companies to transform? How can we enable the people within companies to transform? And how can we ultimately create winners in today's climate? And that's an area that Humphrey's totally expert on. So he produced his models, and together we believe we've got some solutions which we'd like to discuss with you. Now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce Humphrey Walters to you. And often when one goes through a CV, it's very, very dry. So I did a bit of browsing on Google, and I came across a journalist called Bernard Moyo, and he describes succinctly the highlights from his perspective. Number one, in the late 90s, Humphrey took a decision to go on what is called the BT Around the World Yacht Race. This is a crazy race, because if you read about it, it goes around the world the wrong way, against all the prevailing winds, all the prevailing currents, and it is described as the most grueling race of all the races in yachting. Now, the question is, why did Humphrey decide to do this? And he's told us he had learned so much about peak performance. He'd learned so many theories about leadership, about management at high levels. And he wanted to test his theories now against himself and his own ability to validate how he would do against what the theories had to say. So for me, it was an incredible test for Humphrey, and you can read about it in the book that he wrote called The Global Challenge. There's some horrifying moments there, going through hurricanes and going through huge gales most of the time. I certainly could never have done that. But the BT Global Yacht Challenge certainly put Humphrey's theories to the test. And when he returned, he's quoted in the British press as saying, "I wanted to test my theories about leadership in some of the world's most extreme conditions." And one couldn't think of something more extreme than that race. He writes also something that's very telling. What I realized was that most of the people who wrote about it had never really done it. So I decided for the rest of my career, I was going to examine how to create top leaders and top performers in today's tough world. And that's precisely the journey that we were on together. Now, on his return, what was very interesting is that Sir Clive Woodward, who was then in charge of the English rugby team, phoned Humphrey and said, "Humph, can you come and help us with the England rugby team?" At that stage, they were very low on morale and very low on spirit. And so they brought in Humphrey as a mental coach, a mind coach, if I can describe him as that, to try and boost the morale. And guess what? England won the World Cup in 2003. And a lot of this is credited to the way that Humphrey went about the training and the coaching of these tough rugby guys. Another interesting fact about Humphrey is that he also has worked in football league. Chelsea is the side that he coaches for. He currently still coaches for them. And then also he coaches for other sports, like local county cricket and so on and so forth. And another very extreme sport, he's heavily involved in Formula One racing. Again, using tried and tested methods to motivate people around him. Finally, but not least, when the British Olympic team went to Beijing and London, who did they invite to come in and train them? Humphrey Walters. So he went to 2 successful Olympics where England came back with a huge amount of medals, and it actually went way beyond expectation. So that's Humphrey for you. And I think all these years now in business and also in sport and also testing himself against these various theories has proven that he is a man of immense caliber and a man of extreme experience. And I hope that today you will gain a few points as a few takeaways from his chat about how we can help companies become world-class. So sit back and enjoy. And Humphrey, I'd like to hand over to you, my great mentor and my great friend.
I first stepped on this wonderful continent of Africa in 1948 when I was 6 years old, before any of you were born, because my parents, I was born in India, but my parents were doctors. They did tropical medicine. But my father was away in the war, and the first time I saw him was when I was just before, in 1947. I was just over 5.5 years old. He walked in the door in his British Army uniform, and he was then posted to the Gambia in West Africa to revive a tropical medical research station, which is the biggest in the world. And it's still there. In fact, I went back about 3 years ago, and I gave a talk to the African people, about 300 of the government, on Africa through the eyes of a child. So here was a sort of white kid, and I had the photographs of me on the beach and with the house we lived in, et cetera, et cetera. And so Africa gets in your blood. There's no question about it. And I've been very privileged to have experienced it. So I came first to South Africa in 1970, and the way it worked was that we had a big management training company in the UK, and one of the clients we had was Barclays Bank, and they said, "We love your stuff. Would you do it in South Africa?" And I said, "All right." I had no idea, no expansionist dreams of going to South Africa to start a business, and that's of course how most businesses start, isn't it? By accident half the time, like I did. So I said, fine, jumped on a plane, and so started my adventure in South Africa. So I've been through all the tortures that you've been through in terms of the political stuff. And we had we worked out of a flat in Sandton. And I remember driving down the motorway from Pretoria in 1976. I'd been there on and off a couple of years, and the Sandton turnoff, which some of you will be familiar with, was closed. And I thought, why is that? So I went to the next one, turned off, and that's when the riots were in Alexandria and, of course, Soweto. So I've been and seen all the torture. But one thing I always thought about in my mind, I thought, and I'm not a political animal, this can't last. This system is just unsustainable. And little did I know that what would happen and where you're sitting right now. But I have a huge affection for it. And in fact, I meet a lot of African people in London, of course, taxi drivers or whatever. And I can usually tell from their facial features where they're from. So I sort of say, are you from Ghana? And they go, how? He's an African. He goes, and we have chat about Africa. And we've both come to the same conclusion. The first is that the Africans gave the world the smile. That's number one. We had Becky is on this big smile when she clocked in this morning. Wonderful. And the second thing, it never leaves your system. It's always deep down inside. You have something about Africa. So when I started MastWin South Africa, it was a wonderful sort of rebirth for me, almost coming home, because I hadn't really known England before I stepped on as a little 6-year-old kid. But I was sent home to school when I was 11 by boat. There was no airfield. And the next time I saw my parents was when I was 20. And a lot of people go, shock, horror. But what is so interesting is I used to write a letter at school. I had to go to boarding school, obviously. I'd write a letter to my parents, and they'd get it 6 weeks later because it went by sea mail. And with a bit of luck, if they replied, I got the reply, mostly about asking about money, 12 weeks later. So we had these letter books, and you wrote, and you had a carbon copy. Now, most young people don't know what a carbon copy is. And yet it says on the email, CC, they haven't got a clue what it means, but it's a carbon copy. And when my mother died, age 93, I think she was, I found my letter books in the loft of her house so I could look back and see all the things I'd written. So that was kind of the communication. Now, here I am talking to you from my farm in the west of England on a grey day, I have to say, and it's instant. And that's in my lifetime. It's unbelievably spooky when you think about it, of the communications. And I love it. I love all this technology. It's brilliant. Well, what actually happened in 1990, I was on a plane going to Cape Town on the Airbus. And I have to say, humbly, I was in the first class section, pretty poncy. And I was sitting there, and on the next aisle, I was on an aisle seat in the center block. I looked across there, and there was Nelson Mandela. And Nelson Mandela had just been released from the prison in in Pretoria. And he was going down to Cape Town to meet some of his people. It was way before he became the president, all that stuff. He just literally come out of prison. And he was going down to have an interview with the BBC. It was one of the things he was doing, as well as others. And I don't know if you go to a hotel and you look in the drawer and you open the drawer there's often a Gideon Bible. I always do it. I look there and there's the Gideon Bible. And it kind of gives me a feeling that this is a hotel that's got a bit of quality, that they put a Gideon Bible. Well, it so happened on another Airbus, I met the head Gideon. His name's Timo Kraus, and this was in 1982. And he gave me a little Bible. Here it is, a little Gideon Bible of the New Testament. And I always carry it. When I go on a long trip, I always carry this little Bible. I mean, I dip in and out of it. But I don't know, it's just something I do. And I was talking to Nelson Mandela, this wonderful, charming, humble, I mean, just extraordinary aura about him. And I was saying to him, and I said, how was it? And he said, the first book, and this is before I told him about this Bible, the first book I got from one of my guards, a man called Christo Brand, and you probably know the story, was the Gideon Bible, which he took out of the drawer of the Holiday Inn in Cape Town, which I've stayed in. And he said, I'll show you the passage that I used to read when I was a bit down at the dumps. And he marked my Bible, and it's Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 11 to 18. And he marked my Bible. There it is. I don't know if you can see the pencil. That's where he marked my Bible. And at the top, I wrote Christo Brand, because otherwise I'd have forgotten who this guard was. And that's what he said. When my father died at his memorial service, I told the story, and I read this passage at his memorial service. So it was an extraordinary coincidence that here I was. And of course, I have been an extraordinary fan, as most people in the world have been ever since. I also, funnily enough, by coincidence, I ran the London Marathon with Francois Pinault. I can't remember what year it was, but he ran the marathon. I have to say, I started with him. We ran for about 5 or 6 miles. The first bit's quite easy. I have a very great philosophy of marathon running, and that is to start slowly and get slower. And that's kind of how I was. In fact, Derek and I ran the marathon in Joburg. I'll come back to that. But so Francois and I, and luckily, he's such a big guy, I was slightly faster. So I have to say I managed to beat Francois in the London Marathon. So really what I wanted to talk about is a couple of things. Is we are in a tough time. I sail around the world. We went through a hurricane. What I would suggest you do, something I learned at Harvard, if you think there's anything here of value, because what I'd love you to do is to share it with your children, perhaps. I talk a lot in schools, is to jot stuff down. And what they taught me in Harvard was what you've got to do is you've got to think in ink. That is the action of jotting it down. Because if you do, it puts in a different part of your brain. So you might like to think in ink, jot a couple of things down. But I'm going to talk firstly about the mental side of coping. When we were in a hurricane, one of the ladies on my crew, we were a mixed crew of 14, she said, we're in this hurricane. We don't know what we're in. We don't know how bad it's got to be. That's me on the helm with my buddy. We had a buddy system. You did everything in pairs, a very, very strong system. When you're sailing in a hurricane, try and ignore the wind. And that's really what we've got to try and do right now. We're in a hurricane. So for goodness sake, it's there. We can't do much about it. So let's try and ignore the wind. And I'll just tell you a little story about what I think, all of us. I'm also going to talk about the practical side. What steps are there? So I'll try and give you 2 formats, if I may. But before that, I do a lot in schools. And there was a city academy. The Labour Party in this country started these academies and put them in very deprived areas. A very good concept. Brand new buildings, brand new schools to try and get the children into education. And it was a great. Now, this particular one was in Middlesbrough City Academy. Middlesbrough had just been voted the worst town in England. So you imagine the morale, they're rubbish at football, because I work with Chelsea. And the town had been the worst of the long. And this City Academy was in the worst area on the worst city, but it was brand new. And they'd failed the Ofsted, which is, those of you who've come from teaching, is the test that schools have, to pass. And they'd failed it. You fail it twice, they would have closed it, which meant the kids wouldn't have gone to another school 10 miles away, wouldn't have gotten a bus. So it was absolutely essential that this didn't close. The teachers, like all teachers, incredibly dedicated. So they said, can you come up and work with us? So I worked with them in a 2-day workshop, and all they wanted was a bit of hope and a bit of, recognition. And it was wonderful. They were just great. The headmistress is a fantastic woman, battling against everything that you could throw at her, you know. And she said to me, Humphrey, when I said that was great, and she was very flattering, it's very nice, I felt good about it. And she said, would you come and run some classes for our 16-year-old kids? And I thought, oh no. Now this is 400 kilometers from London. Do I need this in my life? She said, can you do 6 lessons once a week? I thought, I've got to drive 400 kilometers up for a 40-minute lesson and 400 kilometers back with 16-year-old English kids who are the worst terrorists on the planet. And I thought, I don't really need it. But of course, what do? Of course, you say yes. So up I go. And I was actually really frightened. I said to her, what am I going to teach them? I was rubbish at school. I scraped through everything. She said, Humphrey, you'll be fine. She'll say, just show them lots of pictures, slides, film clips, and keep them busy for 40 minutes and you won't get stabbed. So I thought, wow. So I get there and I'm always early. I'm incredibly punctual. Screw everything together and this brand new equipment and everything like that. You know, I had many film clips, slides, and God knows what. And the first guy who walked in the room was this huge 16-year-old spotty kid called Jason. And he came and sat in the back row with his arms crossed like this. And you know them, you've all been at school. And I thought, right, I've got to make friends with this bloke. So I went up to him in a pathetic way and I said, I'm Humphrey. Can you imagine? I'm going up to the north of England. I'm a southern softie, right? And I'm going up to the north and I'm called Humphrey. It's not a brilliant start, is it? It's a great name for a donkey. And in fact, the cat at number 10 was called Humphrey. So it's never another human being. So I went up to him and I said, hi, Jason, my name's Humphrey. And he said, Jason. And he sat down. And I said, listen, there's lots of room. There were no other kids in the room. They hadn't turned up yet. Why don't you come sit down here? So he said, I will sit here. So I thought, right, this is a guy not to be messed with. So anyway, I carried on. And the game seemed to go okay, you know. And at least, there wasn't any violence and it was fine. And they all filed up. I could have been absolutely invisible. And I thought, well, I did expect that to a degree. So I jumped in my car. I drove 400 kilometers thinking, what have I got to do to engage these kids? There must be something to rack my brains. Anyway, I went up a week later. Basically what happened, I had a different set of slides, more film clips and all this sort of stuff, screwed it together. Nobody in the room. 3 minutes to go. In walked Jason. So my question to you is, where do you think he sat? And a lot of people said in the front row. Not a chance. You're never going to get somebody with a back row mentality, are you with me, to sit in the front row. You're never going to do that. But what he did do is he sat one row forward. And the impact on myself, the impact on the class was dramatic. Because for whatever reason, this guy suddenly thought in his brain, this is not as bad as I thought. This is quite interesting. I'm going to give it a little bit of my attention. And the whole thing from that was fantastic. Never be their bosom mates, but I had no problem with these kids. They'd come up and ask questions, the whole direct. And I think that's what we're trying to do. I think that's what you've got to do in South Africa. In a sense, I think you've got to move the nation one row forward. And there's many ways you'll do it, many sources of inspiration. And you talked about Francois and the World Cup, and you've just won another one. So if you have in the back of your brain, all I have to do is move one row forward. When I started with the England rugby team, we had a mantra to try and find 100 things and just do them 1% better. That's kind of the winning zone. And that's what we need to get in. So think about Jason. And you, on the mental side of what attitude you have, was genius. I worked a little bit with the England team for the World Cup, which you won. Erasmus had a stroke of genius in appointing a black captain. As soon as that happened, I knew that we were in trouble. And I went to Eddie Jones, an Australian, very stubborn, and I said, you don't realize what you're up against now, Eddie. We played really well against the All Blacks, but that's not where it's at. Because you're not going to get any fitter when you get to the World Cup final. You're not going to get, more tactics, but what you can do is work on the mental side. And I said to Eddie, I said, listen, these guys are South Africans. They're not going to be playing for a cup or to win the World Cup. They're going to be playing for all the black kids and all the disadvantaged people in their country to say there's hope. That's what we're playing for. And do you know what? I knew you would take us apart because I knew, and it's what we call gees, and that's my Afrikaans pretty bad example, but I'm doing my best, is what's deep down in your soul that makes the difference. And winning teams and winning organizations have chis in their soul. They do it for a different reason. And that's where I thought it was great. And what I did before that, I knew how important this was. When I was with England, I did a sort of assessment of the countries we were up against. So, of course, the All Blacks was one. The Aussies were another. And, of course, yourselves, the South Africans. And we sat down with Clive Woodward, who I work with now, and a couple of the coaches. And I said, all right, what do you think is in deep down in the soul? What makes them really hum? And you are Francois is a very religious man. And it's based really on religion, on the fact that it is God and country in your view. You know, you are doing something for the greater good and all the rest of it. And so I said, that's what we got to remember. That's what's going to be driving. In fact, Khaleesi, I had a picture of him and he had Jesus on his wristband, actually written on his wristband in big letters. So if you look at the All Blacks are as hard as nails. What's in their soul, their chis, is they never take a step backwards. They never whinge about anything or complain about the referee. They're never down in the dumps. If they concede a try, which they do quite often, because they're always going for attack, they're not going to worry about that. They'll just keep going. So they don't think they're ever going to yield. They are not. They're as hard as nails, and they'll play a 100-minute game for 80. That's the way they are. So we got to think about that. And then if you look at the Aussies, if I was to ask you what's in their soul, of course, it's revenge. We sent their forefathers on prison ships to Aussie, and they cannot wait to get, even if you talk, Michael Linus, a famous Australian, is a good friend of mine, they still deep down inside, this is revenge, boys. This is a chance for us to get revenge on what happened. So you have to think of these things at that elite level. What is in the soul of the people you're up against? Because as I said, that's what's going to carry them over the line. And of course, yours did. I suspect that the England team, when they come to the cup final, thought where they'd win it. And they were thinking more about the bonus that they were going to get, right, when they won it, so they can buy a new kitchen, rather than what the South Africans. There was a huge disparity in terms of what's deep down in their chest. So there's little examples. What I thought I'd do is to give you an idea of the 6 things I think when you're sailing in a hurricane, which you are, what are the things that you need to think about, if I may say, that's going to get you through? Now, the first one is GOOB, G-O-O-B. There is always good out of bad. And that's what you have to think about. And that's what I get kids to think of. You know, they don't know where they're going to go, what their career is. I said, don't worry about it. Something will crop up. There's always good out of bad if you keep looking for it. And you'd only get that by relating with people, talking to people, being friendly, being amenable. So remember, Goob, a lot of people are really twisting the throttle now because there's good out of bad. I've been through in my business career the 3-day week in the UK. I've been through interest rates going to 20%. I've been through all sorts of South African riots, all this stuff. Every time this happened, we came out stronger because we got together, a bunch of guys who wanted to work together and said, we can crack this one. And we did. So that's my number one. My number 2 is it's okay to be not okay. Us blokes are useless at that, admitting that that we've got to worry. You ladies are 10 times better at it. That's what I learned, particularly the girls on my crew. I said to one of the girls, Lynn Guy, Australian girl, lovely girl, I said, Lynn, I'm shit scared. She said, so am I. And I felt so much better because I thought I was the only one. So if you go to the Olympic Games, I've been to 2, Beijing, you see, you've got these young athletes of every country, but in my particular country, 18 years old. So suddenly they're going to Beijing on a plane. They've never been there in their lives. Their whole support system is left behind, their parents, their coaches. And they're like, and arrive in the Olympic Village. And whilst nobody knows each other, and I noticed that in the dining room, you get dining areas in the Olympic Village, so with countries, okay, and you have times where you can go and eat. And I noticed there was a lady swimmer, a young girl about 18, came in, looked in to see it at her Team GB table and couldn't see somebody, one of her mates, so went away and came back 10 minutes later until somebody was sitting there. And then she went and sat down. And I thought, that's ridiculous. So I changed from the British team to Team GB to say, that's what we are. And that's how you got to behave. Sometimes you got to label it. right, as to the behavior you expect. And so what we did is we had a number of rules, but one of them was you sit next to the next available chair, regardless who's sitting there. You probably don't know, it doesn't matter. And then we had a scheme whereby the person who was sitting there had a kind of little welcome, come here, and how they could get the dialogue going. The impact on the performance of Team G was dramatic. The number of medals we won was out of all proportion, way beyond what they thought. The atmosphere was absolutely fantastic. And what you could see, the measure of success of these little things, was I would go to the swimming hall and you'd find a shot putter in there. It's a bloody great hole we go back. So what are you doing? Oh, well, I was sitting next to so-and-so at breakfast. I wanted to come and see her and support her. That would never have happened in any, when I talked to other Olympians, never happened. They just stuck to their own particular discipline. So it's okay to be not okay. So it's the ability to say, I actually don't feel great, or I've got a bit of a worry, because the strength of your comrades is massive if you allow them into what your concerns are. And I've been writing about stress. I don't call it stress. I call it staying healthy under pressure. Because you say to somebody you're stressed, they'll say, no, I'm not. So that's not going to get us anywhere. The third thing is, if I was to ask you what a chess grandmaster, what was the great, it's a very mental, stressful game, chess, at the top level. What is in the mind of a grand chess master? Why are they so good and so much better than everybody else, when everybody else knows the rules, but some of them are better? Most people say to me, well, of course, they've got this ability to imagine 5 moves ahead. They somehow are able to sort of visualize what's going to happen, and they plan all their stuff. Well, that's mathematically impossible if you work it out. You couldn't possibly carry in your brain 5 moves ahead because you've got an opponent. So if you work out the probability factors, you mathematicians, it's millions. And a chess grandmaster realizes, why clutter your brain with information that is totally irrelevant, which increases the stress, when what you've got to focus on is the next move. All they focus on is the next move. And that's where people go wrong. They clutter their brains with all sorts of stuff, which increases the worry, when what they should focus on is, what is the next move? Let's make that the best move possible I can do. And then I'll worry about the next move after that. When we won the World Cup in Sydney, we won it by 35 seconds in extra time. That's a lot of pressure. That's 6 years of my life. And I'm sitting there thinking, I'm a guy about winning, and we come second. And I was told by Vince Lombardi in Green Bay in 1968 that coming second is top of the losers. And that's, of course, what happened when you thrashed us in the World Cup. And so what we said to the players, right, lads, all you got to do, keep hold of the ball, possession, don't make a mistake, and don't worry about the territory. We know we've got to get close, but just do those 2 things. Focus on that. Hold on to the ball. Don't make a mistake. And we will get up there. And then when you think you're close enough, sling it out to Johnny Wilkinson, and he'll bang it over the post. And that's what happened. And I know the Australians didn't, because I know most of the Australian players, they were trying to think, what fancy tactic can we use, cluttering their brain with completely useless information, particularly as they didn't have the ball. What they should have concentrated on is to get the ball, but they didn't. So focus on that. So control what you can control, and mental alertness is essential to success. The fourth thing I've got is what we did in terms of on the yacht. In terms of you've got every 45 seconds, this huge wave comes at you. It's about 30 meters high. And that's 7 months of my life. Particularly the worst leg was to come from South Africa, from Sydney to Cape Town, the fairest cape of all, was it ever? Boy, was I glad to get there. I'll tell you what, that Southern Ocean is the worst on the planet. I'd never go through that again, but I wouldn't have missed it. First lights we ever saw, which is very exciting. When you're on a yacht, the first lights were at Hermanus. I know some of you are not far from that. And suddenly we thought, wow, there's some light, after 2 months at sea. And we looked on the chart, and it was Hermanus. Then we saw the Cape, the fairest cape of all. So what we did was we had a phrase which says, we've got to look for the gap in the wave, because this wall of water comes at you. All you can see is this wall of water, and you're focusing on the wrong stuff. And one of the girls said, listen, you guys on the helm, look for the gap in the wave. There was always a gap, a dip. And all you had to do is to say, right, there's my gap. I'm going to poke the nose of the yacht through that. The rest of the stuff's irrelevant. So think about that. When all this stuff is being thrown at you, think about the gap in the wave. The fifth one is fatigue makes cowards of us all. When I went to Green Bay Packers to see Vince Lombardi, who was the coach, he said, Lombardi time is always 15 minutes early because you have to be mentally alert. And the second thing is, do you want to be trusted by people that you deal with in business? So I said, yes, it's fundamental to me. So he said, well, how can you trust someone who can't even be bothered to turn up on time? Now, that was a fundamental golden rule. In the rugby team, I closed the door. And a couple of the lads, once they got used to how important this was and serious we were, they parked their cars, ditched their cars and ran to the hotel where we were rather than be late for a meeting. I didn't know that. I was told that afterwards. And so it's fundamental. Now, we may not be the best, we may not be the cheapest, but we'll be there. And it's be there in all sorts of things, answering phone calls, turning up to meetings, coming prepared with the right stuff. And that's all about making the second effort. And that's incredibly important. And Lombardi said that games are won and lost in the last 5 minutes of the first or the last 10 minutes of the second half. That's when you have to treat the throttle, because that's where the second effort comes in. Of course, that's another illustration of how we personally won the World Cup. And certainly you did. You tweaked the throttle massively. So my last one was the importance of role models. I talked about Mandela and I talked about the Gideon Bible. There is somebody I hope is here. I can't see him. One of my huge role models, somebody who really made a massive difference to my life. We used to run these seminars using Vince van der Bijl. Clive Rice was on them. Sadly, he died, and others. And one of them, with this young, in those days, blonde god, and his name was Bruce Fordyce.
He's here, Humph.
If you're here, is he here, Clive?
Yeah.
Oh, Brucey.
I'm here. Sorry, it says Jill Fordyce.
Hey, you cut your hair.
It says Jill Fordyce because I can't work my computer, so she had to do it for me. And I'm still, and you'll enjoy this. I'm still in my running gear.
Yeah, you're still. Listen, I'm in my smart gear for you, for God's sake.
No. It's because we've got water cuts and things. So I haven't been able to shower. So Maurice tried to do something with my hair, but it didn't work. And so I just got one thing, just for the audience here. Though, our favorite thing was your story about about your name, Humphrey, and about John Cleese's advert for British milk.
Yeah.
And how they gave him the project of advertising British milk. And he thought it was probably one of the most boring things you can ever think about is how do you advertise milk? And in those days, they used to leave your milk on your doorstep of your house and it would remain unstolen, unlike nowadays. So he thought about this thing and he said, okay, we've got to make it that British milk is so delicious. It is so fantastic that there's a mythical creature out there called Humphrey, who unless you get your milk in and put it in the fridge quickly, Humphrey steals it. And so the payoff line, which I have never forgotten, I mean, this is back from the 1980s and proof that I don't have Alzheimer's, is that the payoff line was, watch out, there's a Humphrey about.
Brucey, you're a sad man to have that memory. Yeah, you're a dear. That's good. But he said to me, I went to see him finish where he nearly got beaten by Bob Dylan, and we were having a seminar. The coverage was dreadful in those days, and I thought, oh my God, Brucey, you're going to be on a stage in a couple of days talking about winning. You don't, for God's sake, don't come. And when he finished, I said, Jesus. That was close. Brucey said, no, I had it all under control, which of course he did. And he said, but I got here as soon as I could. And then I forgot that comment. But he got me running because I just suddenly thought, wow, I never thought I could do that. He encouraged me. And I've done since then 48 marathons. And I'm trying to do 50. He's just, Bruce, I've taken your advice, mate. I will go there somehow. So role models have been hugely important to me. And just as I look out of my window here, across my fields and my farm, I've got a copse of trees, which I can see right now. And there are 37 trees planted. And every one of those trees is planted about somebody who helped me in my life. I don't forget. It's important to have an incredibly long memory. Brucey, you've got a tree. I can actually see it. And I looked through these trees and I walked through, and I wouldn't have the wonderful place I've got now had it not been for people helping me, kicking me up the backside, saying, why don't you do this? So role models, particularly for your children, are incredibly important. So there's really the 6 things I've talked about. You are going to get a copy of this so you can use, just think about them, what's relevant to you. Maybe they're not all, maybe some are fine, but think what's relevant. So my last part of what I wanted to talk about was, that's more the emotional side. How can you get yourself, in a sense, tuned in to what you're trying to do? But you've got to have a game plan. And that's really what we need. So I figured out, what is it that companies who succeed and do really well do of the things? Now, lots of companies do initiatives, and that's fine. But I always say that what you've got to think about is, what outcome are you after? So my outcome in running a marathon was to feel good when I ran down the Mall in London in front of Buckingham Palace feeling okay. That was my outcome. That's all I wanted to do, and raise some money, of course, for charity, which of course we all do. And to do that, that's why I said I've got to do the training. And we have to train the winter. It's not nice. But the training was part of, because that's what I want to be. I want to come down the Mall looking great and not collapsing and all the rest of it. So the outcomes I've figured out, what are the outcomes of organizations that do really well? And I've got 6 of them. There is an interesting thing called the rule of 6. Squads go around, special forces go around in between 4 and 6. The reason being that it's big enough to have the skills you need, but it's small enough to have great communication and everybody knows what's everybody doing. I go to meetings where they have 11, 12 people. Hopeless. You only 4 or 5 of them take part. So that's a real thing to look at. So here are my 6 kind of game plans. The first is a sense of the present. What that means is that you have the ability to see what's going on, and you continually audit. What's the morale like? What are the things, what are we doing well? What isn't, what we're doing? So it's an audit. And to be able to audit something, you need things to audit against. So here are the next 5, which I think are outcomes that are incredibly important. The second one is a sense of excitement. What makes people get out of bed to come to this organization? What do we need to do to create more sense of excitement? What are some of the little things we might do? And if you think about that, you might think, wow, we haven't done a get together. We haven't had a few beers together. In Mast, we always used to meet every evening. It's amazing when I think back, because it was exciting listening to all of us colleagues and friends. What have they done that day? And it buoyed us up. So sense of excitement is my number 2. My number 3 is a sense of belonging. What do you need to do to make people feel part of the organization? Make people feel that has their interests at heart. Make them feel that they belong to it. And it's something that, they really stand up for the business and what it is all about. Erasmus did a hell of a lot on that. I've watched the films about him, about making people feel part of it. And the little things he did that gave people a sense of, we had a guy in the World Cup called Simon Shaw, player, never played a match in the World Cup, never actually got on the pitch. So we had to make sure he had a sense of belonging. So we gave him primary tasks, and he would be the first person to talk at the debriefs. So we made him important. We made him to look at various elements of the game. And it wasn't us starting off the meetings. We said, Simon, you were looking at all this. You're a great player. What do you think went wrong? What went right? And he felt really part. If you talk to Simon, whilst he didn't get on the pitch, he really felt that he was contributing massively, which he was. So that's the third one. The fourth one is a sense of performance. What do you have to do to measure performance? What do you have to do to make sure people understand how important their part is to the overall performance? I go to board meetings. They talk about things like, oh no, we must keep this in the boardroom. And I said, what for? Why is it so secret? The people who are going to carry this out are out there. They need to know. So you should be talking about what we don't tell people. We shouldn't be doing what we don't tell people, but what we do tell people. For goodness sake, share your dreams, share your worries, share all that. There was a wonderful thing. I worked for IBM for many years. Lou Gerstner took over IBM and he had to reduce it from 500,000 to 250,000. A massive cut in the most blue chip company in the world. Nobody ever got fired for buying IBM was the slogan. And what he did was so clever. He had Lou's letter every week from Armonk. He sent out at the same time from America his letter. And you could access it. If you were a customer, you could access it in the foyer. And it was all very folksy, very friendly, a bit like we are at Mast. And he's saying, oh, guys, I made a bit of a mistake. If you see the comment I made in the press, sorry about that. I didn't mean to say that. And then he'd say, look, I want you guys in Germany to talk to the blokes in South America. They've just got a really interesting idea of marketing. So he did this sort of folksy letter every week, and people would get up in the middle of the night, right, in their time zone to look at Lou's letter. And he was spectacularly successful in reducing what was a hurricane for IBM and still keeping them at the top. So that was really important. The next one is a sense of value. What can you say and make sure people understand, make sure they get the recognition they need? And the last one is a sense of the future. People really want to know, where are we going in this business? Whilst they need to be a chess player, but they also need to think about, wow, this sounds exciting. And what you'll find with these things, they all link together. So if you do something on a sense of value, it will impact on all the others. So you don't have to do 100 things. But what is important is the first one, is to figure out where you are. So I think that what I would say is that what we are interested in, there they are. So do an audit. Just look at where you are, how you feel yourself against what you're doing. Is it exciting? Do you feel part of it? What about your future? And so on. So that's the 6 senses. So really, I think, just to sum it up, I'd like to say, look, we at Mast, we're a very friendly bunch. We love performance. We've all been involved in performance. We have massive experience, and we'd love to come and chat to you. That's really it. In fact, I'm chatting to an organization on Tuesday. I said, look, never mind what we do. Let's come and have a chat. Let's sit down with you. Let's establish a rapport. Let's figure out what it is in your mind and whatever. And let's see how we're going to crack it. And that's the way we've always gone in Mast, which is why I think that people find us very, very easy to chat to. And I think lastly, before I hand over to Becky, I think it's very important that you have a sense of humor. And I think that's what I've learned. It's never that tough. Have a sense of humor. I was giving a talk about the yacht race, about the world's toughest yacht race, to an audience of computer people, about 350 in a banked auditorium. And my wife said, you never talk about this stuff at home. Can I come with you? I thought, oh no, do I need my wife in the back row? This is something I don't need. So I thought, oh, all right. And it was in Birmingham, it's about a 2-hour drive from London. So I said, okay. So up she came and sat in the back row. All I could see the whole of this talk was my wife thinking, God, I hope the hell she likes this stuff. Because if she doesn't, I've got 2 hours in the car with her on the way home. And that's kind of something I didn't really relish. Anyway, I did my thing. She seemed okay. And I'm just getting off the stage, and the CEO, who's a real great sense of humor, said, now, Humphrey, you stay there a minute. I'm going to ask your wife the first question. And I thought, oh, no. So he walked up 45 steps in this banked auditorium at the NEC in the National Conference Centre in Birmingham, and really taking the piss. And you could have heard a pin drop in the audience. Everybody thought, I wonder what this question is going to be, and I wonder what she's going to answer. And so he put the question, he said, listen, Sue, we've been hearing about Humphrey, how tough it was, and how he's had to do this, and it's 11 months at sea, and you only got 2 hours sleep, and blah, 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 blah. Tell me, in your wildest dreams, would you ever have believed he was capable of doing that? And she said, as quick as a flash, in my wildest dreams, Humphrey doesn't even feature. So never forget how important a sense of humor. Thank you so much for coming. It's been brilliant. I can't believe I'm so thrilled to be involved with my friends. Something I thought we should have done ages ago, but we didn't, but we are now. And please just chat to us. Just have a chat to us, because who knows? We might give you something that's interesting, and we might not be the right people, which is also fair. So thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. Brucey, it's great to see you, my friend.
Becky, it's Bruce here. Can I just say something? I don't really have a question, but just to say that back in 1983, 84, I met the Mast guys, and I can honestly say that what I learned from them, what they taught me, has changed my life forever, in an extremely positive way. And Humphrey, just to you, and also to Clive, and to, sadly, Mike Mack, who's no longer with us, I had little idea that when I when I joined up with you guys, that sort of 40 years later, I would still be speaking and giving talks and solving my own problems with some of the stuff that I learned. I mean, I've never forgotten the Vince Lombardi stuff, Humph, and a whole lot of other stuff. Fatigue makes cowards of us all. Those things come back to remind me of things all the time. And even little Mike's funny little quips, like facial stubble that the razor has missed when you're going to your first interview. But, you know, there's just so many thousands of examples I can give you, great times, and literally transformed my life. Did I make a lot of money out of it? Actually, I did. But that is the least important thing, the experiences, the travel, and probably most of all, as a very young sportsman, the confidence in myself to be able to get up and speak and teach and even have an opinion in an argument. So invaluable. Thanks, Humph, and thanks, Clive. And Mast will always be very, very deeply embedded in my heart.
Thank you very much for your wisdom. You've obviously lived it. It's lived wisdom, it's empirical wisdom, and it's stuff that really has stuck with you, and you've imparted so ably and so well to all of us. And for that, I thank you. And I thank you very much, the audience who came today. It really was exceptionally high, 90 people participating. And that's a great privilege to have you guys watching us, and we thank you. So let's call it a day. We shall follow up this series with another series, and we'll let you know about the next event that will occur shortly. Thank you very much for coming, and have a good day.